Okay, so I've already hit the heel transition and all the curve here around to the side with 120 grit. So now I'm going to do the length with 120 grit and then come up to the headstock transition and then the around the headstock. So again, got a sanding block. At this point, I'm going to use a sanding block so that I can cover as big an area of the surface as I can. Got 120 on one side, 220 on the other, so ready to go. And I'm still going to follow the grain. Just being really careful to constantly follow the curve, to follow the radius of that curve, and never stay more than one stroke on on the same plane. Always changing. Now, I've seen a lot of people at this point go across the grain, and sure, you think that you're able to make a nice radius with your hand as you follow across the grain like this, but my issue with that is that now you're putting scratches across the grain that you're going to have to go back in anyway and take out to go along the grain and have a really nice finish. So I follow the grain. I go with the grain. After I put pore fill on, I'll do a little bit of cross grain sanding to take the excess pore fill off down to the surface of the wood. That way it's just sort of a token gesture. I know that, okay, I also followed a nice radius this way, but even then I'm going to finish up by going with the grain. Main thing is just don't stay on one surface for more than one or two strokes at most. And I'll even start out on the side and work my way over this way. And I'm not pushing, I'm not pushing the block into the wood. I'm just riding the weight of the block along and just tightening up the grain. My shape is in. I don't want that to change as much as possible. So at this point, I'm just trying to tighten up the grain while keeping the same profile. I do want to be mindful not to get too carried away and knock into my really nice transition curve here to the headstock. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to knock the edge off of your sanding blocks to make a little soft radius edge there, just in case you ever do kind of get a little carried away and hit. That's easy to do. I'm just being really careful, but that would kind of foolproof it. Really nice. Really nice. Yep. Really happy. That is just a little dark streak of green. I almost thought that I had a flat spot going, but that's where it's so important to check with your hand because you'll feel if it's flat. And sometimes a dark run of grain will kind of fool you. But no, that's just a kind of a long streak of grain running down there. But that's okay, that's wood. All right, now I'm ready to come up, and I'll hit the transition to the headstock and then just the back of the headstock. I think at that point I'll drill for my tuner holes and then go ahead and do the 220 just before applying the pore fill. Okay, now at the curve of the headstock, you have to remember whether you're doing a multi-piece neck, 3 pieces in this case, and adding wings like I've done, I'll call them wings, or some people call them ears, to extend the headstock out, of course, so you can have your tuners on there. Whether you're doing multiple pieces glued together or a 1-piece neck, when you cut the curve for the headstock out, you have to remember that that's end grain. And end grain just doesn't really sand, or at least sand well. So what tends to happen is you're not going to really change the surface of the end grain too much. You risk rounding the edges around it and any grain that runs alongside it. So when I'm working here, it's more for the sake of transitioning to the neck surface that I've just done. So I don't expect this to get much tighter. End grain is already pretty much super tight. And if you think about it, there's really no grain lines there to sand down. You're actually sort of at the pinpoint ends of the grain that are running this way. And that just doesn't really sand. So I'm going to be really careful here because I also don't want to make the nut area any narrower. That's exactly the width for my nut. So I'm just going to work in there and out to the neck, just transitioning. And again, I'm just kind of sitting it in the curve and working away. I don't expect to really change anything here by sanding. It's just so that I know I'm starting from the curve and working out, and I'm not missing anything. And again, I'm making very light passes. I'm not pressing. I'm just riding the block along the grain. And there you go. You can see I've got my fingerboard and I've got my neck width. So it shows me that I'm getting both surfaces equally. And again, following the radius. And just kind of check with my thumb and fingers, and that's it. I'm happy. Look over on this side. Look into the area that I already hit with my flat block, and it's feeling pretty good already. Maybe just make sure that I've got my curve going around to the back of the neck. Yep, nice. Now, we were talking about sculpture before, and this is an area that I really, really like to pay attention to. the contours that I'm making as I transition from the headstock to the curve. And it's easy to lose those when you're refining the grain with finer grits. You can start to soften up the contours. So I always kind of go back in and check just by eye, by feel, and even, again, writing some light on there. I'm just looking for any weird edges or flats. But I definitely like kind of keeping that contour line just to then where it blends into the radius of the neck. I just think it's a nice, elegant finish. Okay, so I've got a really nice transition of the curve to the neck. And now I'm going to finish up by transitioning the back of the headstock to the drawing with the neck. This could be the trickiest, one of the trickiest parts next to the heel to do, because of course you're going from a flat to this radius this way. And so you're actually trying to sand a curve from this plane out and blend it to a radius curve that's going this way. So again, we're talking about some compound curves joining up here. Now, this is where it could be really helpful to have some kind of wide diameter sanding form. And so, bottles can be really useful at this point. So you can get in just right in that section and work. This one's a little bit narrow for where I want to be. And turns out that this is almost the perfect form. And if you know what it is, it's just one of those sandpaper blocks that, you'd use. Normally, you'd have the sandpaper on the flat for when you're sanding, drywall. Or I guess any other flat surface, right? But turns out, if you flip it over and use the radius side where normally your hand would be, this makes a really nice, gentle curve that's almost perfect for transitioning from that flat to the neck. So, grab my 150 grit. Get it on nice and tight. And here again, I want to be very careful not to change the shape. I don't want to change the form at all. I just want to tighten up the grain from that 80 grit to 120 or 150 grit. So make sure that I'm on the flat, and I'll just gently, with a little bit of a radius motion. Now I can also tilt a little bit this way to follow the radius of the neck. For sure I want to clear off any dust, because that dust can dig into my grain and just keep making those scratches even deeper. So I'm not pushing at all, I'm just holding the block and letting the weight of the block do the work. And you can see how much I'm already taking off. So we're getting there, Yeah, a little bit rough still here, but getting closer. Okay, so again, going from the from the heel block and the transition to the neck, and now going down the length of the neck, I'm doing my pass with 220. That's where I'm going to stop before I apply pore fill. And then after the pore fill, I'll see if I can get it off with the excess off with 220, and then work up progressively through finer grits up to 600. Now I've already done the curve around the heel to the neck. So for this last pass, since I'm sure that I've gotten this as round as I can with my sanding blocks and the rougher grits, for this pass I'm just going to use a sheet of 220 without a block, and I'm going to wrap it around the neck and just draw back with the grain one direction, just draw back, and that way I know that I'm just kind of refining that curve as much as I can. So a good idea if you're going to do this technique is get the sandpaper that has the rubberized backing, the grip backing, because it's a lot sturdier and it's not going to want to tear as much when you pull down, especially at the center of the neck there. Just the plain paper back sheets tend to tear. So I've also drawn in a little guideline here because you notice that I like to contour the transition to the headstock. I kind of like the little bit of flat feel that it gives to the thumb when you're playing on these lower frets. Just kind of gives you a little bit of a fulcrum point, kind of spreads out that diameter a little bit to kind of fit the widening web of your hand. And I just think it looks kind of cool to go from a little bit of a soft curve with this soft edge and then drop off to the rounder curve of the neck. I just think it kind of adds a classy touch. So I've drawn a little line there just to make sure I don't hit that softening kind of fading edge and kind of lose it. So I'm just going to make sure I stay behind that and just kind of good grip, consistent, and just draw back. Just like that. And that way I just know that I'm sanding on the curve that I've made, and it's as round as I can possibly make it, by hand anyway. Okay, so then I'll just do the 220 pass on the transition to the headstock and the headstock itself, and then we'll take kind of like an overall look at it and see how it turned out. Okay, so we'll take a look over the whole neck. Just kind of see how it turned out. Try and get my focus there. There we go. And you can see, of course, I've put the tuner holes in and my hanging hole, my signature. Come on this side where we've got a little more shadow. And that should show, yeah, there we go. That shows off some of the contour. And that fading contour line. Try to sharpen this up. The camera isn't sure what it wants to focus on here, sorry. It's really hard to show round surfaces in the camera. Everything wants to just flatten out. And back up to the heel. There we go. curves going on in there. And that's about it. Now, I've been talking a lot about applying pore fill, and you don't have to do that, of course. It all depends on the style or the quality of build that you're after. But I find that even as you go up to the higher grits of sandpaper, even if you go up to 400, 600, if you leave the wood, if you leave the grain open, it has just a slightly rough feel when you're running your hands up and down, like when you're playing, that can just build up a little bit of a friction feel. Even with this 220, as I move my fingers up, I can feel a little bit of grain fighting against that. Of course, going this direction, I'm going with the grain, it's much smoother. But pore fill is really good for eliminating that because, of course, it gets into every little nook and cranny and crevice of the grain, fills it up consistently to the top surface of the wood, so you're left with a marble feel surface, and also makes taking finish really, really consistent and smooth over the whole piece. So I believe in it. I like it. I like to use a water-based pore fill, but that's a topic for another video series, I think. I want to thank you for watching the series if you've stuck with it. I sure hope I was able to give you some tips that help you avoid some of the pitfalls that can happen, and wish you the best of luck with your own building, and thanks for watching. Bye.
Ouch!